Shaitan Rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Hidayat TV. On tonight's live show, the Islamic Insight. My name is Zishaan Moledina, and I'd like to welcome to the studio brother Shabbar Mahdi. Inshallah, tonight we'll continue our discussion with regards to the occultation of the Imam. But tonight we'll be looking into our responsibilities as Muslims during the occultation. This is, dear viewers, a live show, so we welcome any questions that you have. So please dial in using the number you see on your screens, and inshallah we'll endeavor to answer your questions. We'd like to begin this program, inshallah, with the recitation of Quran by Brother Shabbar.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا وليعلمن الكاذبين أم حسب الذين يعملون السيئات أن يسبقونا ساء ما يحكمون من كان يرجو لقاء الله فإن أجل الله لآت وهو السميع العليم ومن جاهد فإنما يجاهد لنفسه إن الله لغني عن العالمين والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لنكفرن عنهم سيئاتهم ولنجزينهم أحسن الذين كانوا يعملون ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه حسنا وإن جاهدك لتشرك بي ما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما إلي مرجعكم فأنبئكم بما كنتم تعملون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much, Brother Shabbar. So, our responsibilities in the time of occultation. I feel if we look back into history, what we find is that the role of the responsibility of the Imam of our time is very much different to the responsibilities that was incurred on the other Imams in the past. So for example, what I mean when I say that is with regards to the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi Ajallahu Faraj al-Sharif, we find that he's going to come to this world to actually establish justice. And we find that he's going to come to this world to establish justice, and not only that, but establish universal government and bring righteousness to the world. But in his absence, Shabbar, it's very difficult. So according to you, what do you feel will be the main trials and tribulations that are come across all Muslims during the time of his ghaibah?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على آله الطيبين الطاهرين. The Quran says ثم أرسلنا رسلنا تترى, and we sent our prophets and messengers one after the other. In other words, as we know also in the Quran, إنما أنت منذر ولكل قوم حاد. Surely, O Prophet, you are a warner, and every qawm, every group, every tribe, every nation has had a had and has had a guide. In other words, there's never been a gap. There's always been a time on this earth where one of the hujjats, of the proofs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have been on this earth. In the same way we have this case even today, the hujjat of Allah is on this earth. Difference, however, as we mentioned in detail last week, he's not in front of us, and we looked at the different challenges that exist. The reason why I just went through this about how every other nation has had a prophet and they were sent one after the other is because, yes, they had trials and tribulations, but the trials and tribulations that we have in this life are different. In this period of time of the ghaibah are different, completely different trials. Which is why the Imam alayhi have mentioned them within their ahadith, which is why they've put stress onto telling us when we look in these books many years later about what the trials will be. For example, last week we looked at how hard faith keeping faith would be. It would be as hard as holding a thorny plant. Of course, it's difficult. Why? Because the trials are so many. Now, I remember I was giving a series of lectures once, and I didn't mean for this to happen, but every day the same ayah kept cropping up. I didn't mean for this to happen, it just kept coming. It was relevant to everything we said in each of those lectures. And that ayah is in Surah Al-Baqarah. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. When you say to them, do not create fitna, fasad, corruption on this earth, what do they reply? Surely we are the peacemakers, we don't cause corruption. We are the bringers of peace, when in actual fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when in actual fact, they are those that bring corruption onto this world. In other words, there will come a time, there has been a time, and there will always be a time when on this earth there are people that say that they bring peace. There are people that say that they have islah, they are bringing islah, peace, justice, reformation on this earth. In actual fact, they are those that cause corruption. So the first, or one of the primary trials we find within this period of time in the ghaibah is identifying who is truthful and identifying who is the false person, identifying who is the person who is working for Islam and who is the person who is working against, who is the person that is working for humanity and who is the person that is working against. Now for that we need to understand the role of the Imam, whether it be our 12th Imam or the other Imam alayhim as-salam. What role did they have on this earth when they were present, when they were the Imams? What role did they have? And now this is a very long issue, Imamat, but very quickly. The role they had, as we mentioned, is a guide. But what type of guide? A non-ma'soomeen is unable to tell what is within the hearts of the believers. What's your intention? You say something but you mean something else. The Imams, however, they were able to go into the hearts. They were of course able to differentiate. The Quran is known as Furqan. The Quran is known as differentiator. Quran and Ali and Quran, Ahlul Bayt, the Quran the same. They are differentiators. They differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. So there are so many traditions and many anecdotes when people came to the Imam alayhi regarding a certain person. And the Imams told them this is a good person. Or the Imams told them no, this is a bad person. أَفَأَن تَقْرَأُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ أَفَأَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. Sometimes you think something is good for you when it's bad for you. Sometimes you think something is bad for you when it's good for you. In the same way, sometimes you think some people are bad or have a bad effect on you. However, in actual fact, they have a good effect. There's a story, I'm not going to mention all of it, but very quickly, there was a story of a scholar. For some reason, people had a bad impression of him, and the story is long. He was a very pious scholar, but people then did not pray behind him because of the impression the rumor spread. The Imam, their role is to tell us who is a good person, who is working for Islam and who isn't. The primary trial that exists today is that we are unable to differentiate who is good and who is bad. What action is good and what action is bad. Now there are so many examples we can give. We're going to skip the examples because very lengthy. Because there are many things which crop up. Is this right or is this not right? For example, is it right that I don't wear perfume? Some people may bring up this argument that, oh, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, etc., he had a spiritual side to his life, therefore we shouldn't wear perfume, therefore we should never eat meat, for example. The Imams, what would their role be? To remove this confusion. Because our Imam is in ghaibah, this confusion is present. Also, the Quran says, as we just mentioned in Surah Al-Ankabut at the beginning of the session, أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فلا يعلمن الله الذين صدقوا ولا يعلمن الكاذبين. Does man think that he will say he believes آمنا وهم لا يفتنون and he will not be tested? ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فلا يعلمن الله الذين صدقوا ولا يعلمن الكاذبين. And surely we tested those before you, and we were able to differentiate and distinguish who was truthful and who was a lie. So trials are always there, but the trials that will be present or are present to us currently are different, because the Imam isn't physically there, as we mentioned, confusion. As we also mentioned there, for example, is a hadith that during the occultation of Imam Mahdi ajidallahu ta'ala farajah sharif, sins will be seen as a matter of pride. In other words, people will be sinning openly and they will tell those that aren't sinning, why aren't you sinning? You should be sinning. Of course, they won't do it that day. For example, there will be so many people drinking alcohol that those who refrain from alcohol will be looked down upon. So it's so intense that sinning will be so open, sinning will be so easily done. How hard is it for us currently to hold our faith? For example, we understand that sins which are prevalent currently and will be prevalent, because even not being close to the Imam has its drawbacks. When we're close to the Imam, we see him. We remember who he is. We remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that deters us from sin. Because we physically can't see the Imam, that also has an effect on us. And sins have an effect on our life. We mentioned before in Islamic Insight. For example, Nabi Musa, he passed by a follower, and this follower was in sajda and he was lamenting, crying and asking for one sin, for one wish that he had. Nabi Musa was going off to do some chores. He came back after a while. He saw this person is still asking. He said, "O person, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given me the power, I would have accepted your prayer and granted your wish." Because he thought this person is lamenting and asking and supplicating to such an extent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent wahi and said, "Tell this person I will not answer his supplication until he does what I like and he stays away from what I dislike." In other words, he stays away from sins. So when we see the main trials that affect us is the confusion. What's right? What's wrong? Is this allowed in Shia Islam? Is this in the Quran? Is this not in the Quran? Is this person good? Is this person bad? But also the sins. Because the sins, they affect our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, Shabbar. So just to recap, you mentioned corruption, you mentioned confusion, you mentioned that as Muslims, sinning will become so easy and open. So how is it then we can protect ourselves, Shabbar, from these trials, temptations that exist during this occultation?
We've mentioned on the program before, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do you not ponder on the Quran? Is there a seal on your hearts? Unfortunately, not just Shia Muslims, but Muslims in general, neglect the Quran. We'll read when someone dies. We'll read or we'll open only for istikhara. We don't look and ponder on the Quran. The question that you asked is, how can we protect ourselves from these trials and tribulations which are affecting us, the sins, the confusion? The primary way is what? To understand the Quran. Use the Quran as a textbook. It came as a textbook. Hudan linnas. It came as a textbook. It came as a book. For example, within fiqh primary source, Quran. Around 500 ayats within the Quran are to do with law. Within akhlaq, the scholars also use the Quran. They use Surah Al-Hujurat, number 49 of the Quran, which is also known as Surah Al-Akhlaq. Not officially, but by other people, because it's got so much information about akhlaq. إنما المؤمنون إخوة لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. The famous ayah of إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. Akhlaq, fiqh, history, we use the Quran. The Quran has a wealth of knowledge for us. When we complain, Ya Allah, guide us onto the right path, Allah will reply, do you not read my book? Why is it that we, in every area of our life, don't use the Quran as a reference? Let me give you an example. Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, he had sent the famous and very revered companion Abdullah bin Abbas radiyallahu an to the Kharijites. He said, go and talk to the Kharijites, spread the message, talk to them, have dialogue with them. Because of course there were tensions, and the Kharijites of course were enemies of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam and true Islam. Abdullah bin Abbas was sent. When he went, his clothes were very beautiful, expensive clothes. His appearance was very nice. He was sitting on a very expensive horse. So he looked very nice. And he approached the Kharijites. They looked up and down, they looked at him. And of course they said, what is this? Amirul Mu'mineen is someone who is meant to be, as in he is meant to have a spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam is not of extravagance. How can you be wearing this expensive clothing? How can you be sitting on this expensive animal? He replied, with the Quran, Man harrama zinat Allah allati akhraja li'ibadih wa tayyibati min ar-rizq. In other words, do not say that thing is haram, or do not cause hasanat. In other words, the gist of the ayah, wear good clothes as long as it is from halal rizq. He replied to them, using the Quran, they couldn't say anything. He's saying, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I can wear nice clothes if they are from halal rizq. In other words, he used the Quran as a source of reference. Whether it be staying away from sins, whether it be understanding what is right and wrong, whether it be understanding akhlaq and the way we should act, the Quran has the answers to all. So that's the primary way within which we keep us away from these temptations. For example, we look at the anecdotes that the Quran gives, the advice that the Quran gives. All we need to do is open, read and understand and ponder. That's the first way. The second way in which we can remove ourselves from sins, first of all, a hadith. Very famous hadith, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسَ كُلِّ خَطِيئَةٍ. The love of this world is the source of every single error and sin. Every single, the love of this world. So when we see that sins are so prevalent, people are looked down upon who don't sin, as we just mentioned. Why are sins there in the first place? حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسَ كُلِّ خَطِيئَةٍ. The sins are there in the first place because of love for this world. If we want to stay away from these sins, we need to remove love for this world. We need to have material detachment. Not saying that you live in a cave. No, but you understand that yes, I have these clothes, I have these things, but I'm able to give them up. Yes, I have my work, but I put namaz first. Yes, I have other things, but I put supplication and ibadat first. So in other words, detaching yourself from the source. In other words, prevention other than cure. And also, another way within which we need to understand that these trials are always going to hit us. For example, throughout the day, you're at work, you're at college, you're at uni, you're even at home, there are always temptations. The TV is on something which shouldn't be on maybe. Or there's music playing in the background, or there's someone swearing or doing ghaibah. The way in which we remove ourselves or keep ourselves away from these sins is what? Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Constantly remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why it says do dhikr. When you do the verbal dhikr, then you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when that person who is a follower of Imam Mahdi, Ajjalillahu ta'ala, Faraj Sharif, leaves his house in the morning, he needs to ensure that he supplicates and he says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan la'in ar-rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And the other supplications available. Then throughout the day, he needs to ensure that he remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Imam. In any way, even if he has some type of thing, maybe right on his hand, something. Just to remind him, look, I'm a Shia Muslim. Look, I am waiting for my Imam. Whatever temptation, whatever sin tries to encounter my soul, I say for example, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So there are many different ways, but we need to remember these holy personalities to stay away from these distractions and these trials and tribulations.
So controlling your nafs, I guess, is one of the ways to actually come over these temptations and these trials. Can you give us some examples of people who exist, who have actually managed to get to that stage where they can control their nafs to the extent where they can keep away from these trials and tribulations?
This question can be split into two parts. The first is ma'soomeen, the other is not ma'soomeen. One misconception that many people have is that the ma'soomeen, salamullahi alayhim,
The infallibles.
Infallibles, they are programmed to not sin. It's within their genetic makeup that they, like angels. Angels don't have free will. Angels cannot physically sin. The ma'soomeen have the capability to sin, but they don't do so. So our imma could sin if they wanted to, but because they have this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because their taqwa is so strong, because their iman is so high, they don't sin. For example, they were, in many ahadith, how do you not sin? The Imam replied, cut your finger off. He said, why wouldn't I do that? He says, look, we can see the athar, the effects of the sins, like you could feel your finger being cut off, which is why we don't sin. So the Aimma alayhim as-salam and the other infallibles are also there. For example, the prime example, the beautiful example of Nabi Yusuf, salamullah alayhi. How tempting was it in closed doors? However, he, because of his strong faith, imagine, look at the things that happened to Nabi Yusuf, salamullah alayhi. If they were even 1/8 or 1/5 of the trials and tribulations that Nabi Yusuf went through happened to us, we would forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'd start complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what have I done to you, Ya Allah, why do you not help me? And there's one interesting story, we're not going to narrate it because it's a very long story, but of this woman who went through so much, but still she never forgot to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to supplicate to Him. Nabi Yusuf, of course, he went through so much, but still he always had faith within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ وَكِيلًا. So this is the ma'soomeen, and of course there is a different level. Looking at non-ma'soomeen, you find a personality, marhum Rajab Ali Khayyat, a mystic. There's a book about him and about his life. Within that book, it is narrated that Rajab Ali Khayyat, before he gained these, before the kashf, before the unveiling, before he understood Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a different way, he was a normal person. One of the daughters of his relatives, as in his cousin or something, fell in love with him. And one day it so happened that they were in a room alone and she wanted to commit a haram act with him. He, of course, at that moment in time, what did he do? He remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he thought, Ya Allah, you test me every day, 24/7. Let me try and test you. I am going to stay away from this sin and I'll test you to see what you give to me. Look at his logic. In the way that at the point of any sin, he remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He ran away from that place, or he said no, he refrained from that sin, and that's when the unveiling started, and that's when he had spiritual upliftment. Why? Because he understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's vow and promise is never broken. If when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, take one step towards me, I'll take 10 towards you, try it out. Try stay away from a sin and see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does for you. Another prime example of non-ma'soomeen, people just like me and you, who were born normally, who had normal lives, and of course gained great spiritual and gained levels of iman, are the maraji', are the scholars and the sources of emulation and the ayatullah. 4, they were born in normal families. Yes, they studied. Yes, they had extraordinary knowledge. Yes, they put a lot of effort. However, look at their life. For example, Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayh, or any of the other maraji', how much money would they and do they get from khums? How much money do they? A lot, millions. Some of them a lot of money. However, you still find that there are many maraji', there's no point mentioning all of their names because there's many. You ask them, they live in rented houses. Their sons and daughters, when they come to visit them, they also have to live in the rented houses. Or their sons and daughters live in rented houses. Their state is not good even though they have so much money in front of them. How tempting is it that I am living in a poor state, all of this money is in front of me to take and spend on myself. But they control their nafs. Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi, they say, for example, the clerical clothing that they wear abba and qaba. So he had this tailor. This tailor is very famous in Qom, Abu al-Fadl Arabpur. Still today, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him long life. He's a very renowned tailor within Qom. Tailor of clerical clothing. So he was Imam Khomeini's tailor, very simple man. And of course there were other clerics that were surrounding Imam Khomeini and were helping him, were his students, etc. So this tailor was called by one of those people that were surrounding Imam Khomeini, and he was told by this other cleric that Imam Khomeini wants to get a qaba sewn. So he said, okay, tell the Imam that now my clothing is different. Before it used to be of a lower quality, now we have extra lining, we have this feature, it's different in color, etc. So this cleric says, forget all of those things. I'll give you one of his qabas, one of his gowns. You just take that and make it exactly onto that. I said, okay. So he got one of the Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi's robes, gave it to Abu al-Fadl, and he took it. Of course, any Maraj's clothes, they began kissing, and of course. Then someone came to him. He said, why did you take his clothes? He said, what do you mean? I was told about that other cleric that take his qaba and sew it in the same way that you find this one, same measurement, same style, etc. He says, no, Imam Khomeini has no clothes left now. He only has this digdasha. What is he going to wear when he goes to namaz, goes to teach? Abu al-Fadl thought, this man who is the leader of the country, who is a faqih, who is a marja, only one pair of clothing. He ran back, gave the clothing back. He said, I've taken the measurements, I'll do it. But look at how this person, and all of the other maraja are the same, alhamdulillah, and the other ulama, that they have access to money or power or prestige, but they still remain as servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to take lessons from them.
Okay, so at the beginning, I mentioned that in accordance with history, and if we look at the responsibility now of the Imam of our time, it's quite different to the responsibilities that the other Imams had. So whilst the responsibilities of our living Imam are quite different, we as the lovers of Imam, we as the Shia of Imam, we as the followers of Imam, surely it just makes sense that we have responsibilities in his absence. So what do you feel these responsibilities are?
This can also be split into two. The first is responsibilities of, let's say, of any other Muslim. Not necessarily a Muslim or a Shia that was living in this time. Maybe someone living in the time of the first, second, third Imam, whatever.
Of course, because we mentioned last week as well that we find in history that a lot of the Imams from the time of the Prophet all the way up to the 11th Imam had actually been preparing the people that there'll be a time when there'll be a period where there'll be no Imam. So the people were already kind of prepared. So I guess you can say that in fact that they had the responsibility at that time as well.
Yeah. Their responsibility, of course, may be the generic, and then there's those that are specific to us. Now, of course, there are many different, and we don't want to have a long list and just read them out because it'll be boring, number one, and of course the brevity. The generic ones are, of course, remaining steadfast in faith, أقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا كتب عليكم الصيام, all the general basic principles and basic rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, if you keep up prayer, if you give zakat, if you help the needy, if you try to come to me, you will get reward. These are the generic values that we should have within our life. So we should make sure that we know the ahkam and we're acting on them. We should know that we make sure that our aqaid is strong. It shouldn't be that I don't know or I haven't proven tawheed to myself. It shouldn't be that I haven't proven justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to myself. It shouldn't be that I don't know why we need to have imams. These core central beliefs of Shia Islam and Islam in general, we need to have grounded. So I should know why I need an imam. I should know why we need anbiya. I should have proved the necessity of qiyamah to myself already. These are just the basic things that we need to have as Muslims in general, not necessarily Muslims that are living during this time. These general principles that...
So I guess one of the things perhaps would be to actually understand and gain the ma'rifah of the imam and the understanding.
Yeah, because many times, for example, you find people, and I've met people that talk about Imam Mahdi, we're waiting for him, we're waiting for him, we're waiting for him. But when it comes to wudu, they don't know how to do wudu properly. When it comes to salah, they won't pray at 6:24, they'll pray at 8 o'clock.
Okay, just before we continue, we've got a caller on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
G.
Yeah, hi. I just had two questions. If you could put a bit of light into that for me, please. I'm a Shia myself. I've got a Sunni friend who, you know, I have debates with, and she wants to know that, you know, if the prayers that we do is right, that we open hands and read namaz. If that's the case, why in Makkah, why don't they do it the way we do it? Why is it that they fold their hands and read namaz and not openly?
Okay, so just to reiterate your question, you're asking as to why we pray namaz with our hands straight down and the others in Makkah pray with their hands folded.
Yeah, that's what she wants to know, because I don't know much about it, you see. So she was keep on asking me, we always have debates, and she wanted to know, she goes, if your namaz is the right namaz, that you're saying your prophet read it and everything, why in Makkah they don't do it the same way, where it's God's house and everything? Why do they fold their hands? And especially when they do the prayer for the Hajj as well, why is it done with the hands closed and not hands open?
Sure, inshallah, valid question, and inshallah we'll look to answer that towards the end of the show.
And my second question is on, you know, when we do matam, and she wants to know that where in Quran it's written that you are allowed to do self-harm.
Okay.
So I just wanted you to put a bit of light into it so, you know, she can know.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, so towards the end we'll try and answer those two questions for you.
Inshallah, 5 minutes towards the end.
Inshallah. Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
Okay, so we were discussing with regards to the responsibilities.
So we were saying, for example, that yes, we have this zeal. That yes, I want to be with the Imam, waiting for the Imam, but the ahkam isn't right. I'm not praying properly. I don't fast. I don't know the rulings. Hadith. That person that does not know the rulings of fiqh of what is halal and what is haram is like an animal. Other hadith, that person that does not know the rulings of that which is haram or halal is like someone who has no religion whatsoever. So there are so many different things that we can talk about. We were just giving a few examples of these branching things that we need to ensure we have. We need to ensure we know the rulings. We need to ensure that we have aqal. We need to ensure that whatever our beliefs are, we put them into practice. So these are the generic things that every Muslim, whether they're living in the 12th Imam's Ghaiba's time or not. Then are the specific ones, which can maybe be shortened. The first is what we call intidhar. We mentioned that in the first of this series, we mentioned that one of the titles of the Imam is Muntadhir, he who is waited, he who we do intidhar for. Intidhar isn't just me sitting around and waiting. Intidhar is when I wait for the Imam. How do I wait for the Imam? I prepare myself. So maybe that may be, for example, that at the end of the day I do muhasabah. At the end of the day I do accounts. Okay, I think, okay, I've done this wrong, I don't know about this, I don't know about this. I need to improve this. So that means, how do I wait for the Imam? I understand, for example, that I am rude to my parents. How do I wait for the Imam? I wait for the Imam by making sure that all these bad qualities that I have within me are removed. So I am bad to my parents, maybe I don't have khums, maybe I don't know a certain thing within the Sharia. Intidhar involves understanding the things I don't know, primarily. It also involves, for example, let me give you a hadith to explain more. That during the ghaiba of the Imam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam says, one should have good behavior and modesty. And this is waiting for the Imam. So intidhar is what? Intidhar is preparing ourselves for the Imam. So, and that person that dies while waiting for the Imam, it is like he has shed his blood in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is intidhar. This is waiting for the Imam. So it's not that I just remember the Imam on Thursday night or I just remember the Imam on Friday. No, I remember the Imam in every single second possible. In everything, I supplicate constantly and I cry, thinking, Ya Imam, why are you not with me? This is intidhar. The second then is what we mentioned, supplications. Why is it important? Because supplications, the real reason why supplications are stressed, for example, Sahifa Sajjadiyah, Ramadan, we have many supplications, is because they allow us to build this spiritual atmosphere around us. I'm sitting there with my Mafatihul Jinan or other books, and I'm reading these supplications, and I'm trying to make this connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I supplicate for the Imam. Just look and read some of the material. Look at the English translation, or if we understand Arabic, we can just look straight away at what the Imam says and what the other Imam alayhim salam say about the Imam. Beautiful things. And when we read these, this is the emotional side of our responsibilities, that we emotionally become ready. We read, for example, in Dua Nudba, where is that person who is the avenger of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wassalam? Where is that person who is the bringer of justice? We read these, we become emotional. And of course, it's very important that emotionally we're ready for the Imam. The second is supplication. The third is that I have taqwa. This is also, we can say it's also a generic one, but the third is that we have taqwa within our life. Now, taqwa comes from the root word wiqaya or waqaya, which means to protect ourselves from. Protect ourselves from what? Taqwa actually means to protect ourselves from sin. So when we are during this ghaibah of the Imam, we have taqwa, meaning what? We protect ourselves from sin. For the Imam, as we mentioned a few sessions ago, on Friday, when he gets the report of what his followers have done, he cries. He cries because this my follower who wants to be with me, who has strong iman, but then he commits sin. This is my follower who has tried so hard, who gained a higher spiritual level, he committed a sin, dropped right back down. The Imam cries for us because he understands that, my followers, I am waiting for you. When we don't have taqwa within our lives, how can we expect the Imam to come? How can we expect the Imam to choose us? When we don't have God consciousness, when we do things freely. There are some people, they will pray, they will fast, they will do all the ahkamat, but they'll do it for the wrong reasons. You ask them, why do you do these things? Why is it that you go and pray? Yes, you pray jama'ah. Yes, you pray on time, but why do you do it? Do you do it out of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or do you do it because you understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves me to do it? Or do you do it because of the reward? Or do you do it staying away or trying to abstain from the punishment? You should be doing it because you understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves these things. This is taqwa. Taqwa is doing our actions because lillah, understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said something, I do it because He is deserving of my obedience and worship. Very quick hadith. There were companions around the Prophet of Islam, and the Prophet began talking about his brothers. He said, you are my companions, but my brothers are different. They asked, who are your brothers, O Rasulullah? He says, my brothers are those that within Akhir al-Zaman, within the ghaibah of Imam Mahdi ajillahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif, they believe in me without even seeing me. This is another trial that we have. That we haven't seen Rasulullah, we haven't seen Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, we haven't seen our 12th Imam, but we still believe. This is difficult, but Rasulullah says we are his brothers because of this. The way in which we strengthen our belief in Rasulullah, the way in which we strengthen our belief in the Imam and Imamat and Wilayat is taqwa. That's the third way. And of course, when you look at the Imam and the way in which the Imam, as we mentioned, he gets our reports. Does he look at our sins? Yes, he gets the sins report. Does he look at why we do it? Yes, he understands why we did a sin. He understands that, okay, this person in this week, he, for example, he swore. Why did he swear? Because what's the root of all sins? Why do we sin? He swore because, or he hit someone, or he stole money because he didn't understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the proper way. That's why we sin, because we haven't understood Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third and one of the most important responsibilities is that we have taqwa and piety. Nabi Dawood was passing by and he saw an ant. This ant, there was a lot of sand present. This ant, he was taking one small grain of sand from this place and putting it over there. And was coming back doing the same thing again and again and again and again and again. Of course, he could speak to the animals and insect. He asked, oh ant, what is this that you're doing? Taking one from here and putting it there? He says, I have a beloved, another ant. She says, I will only marry you if you take all of this sand here, and it was a lot, and put it over there in a pile. Nabi Dawood said, this is impossible. Even if throughout the whole of your life you try and do this, it's impossible. Why are you doing this? He says, just in the thought that every moment of my life, I am serving my beloved. Every moment of our life, even though we may think that it's impossible for us to be with the Imam, if we spend it serving the Imam in whatever tiny way we can, then inshallah we'll be raised with the Imam, inshallah.
Inshallah. So, in terms of our Imam, some people can communicate with him, but what do you feel the role of the ulama are? You've mentioned obviously some of the names with regards to the Maraja who have managed to control their nafs and their soul, Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi. You've mentioned a few examples of those, but what do you feel the role is of the ulama in the absence of our Imam of our time?
Inshallah, there's intention also to have one detailed session on taqleed. Because of course this is to do with the Imam as well. One thing that people sometimes fail to understand, or it's hard for them to understand, that the second best option for us is to follow the ulama. Because we can't, or we are unable to go and ask our questions directly to the Imam. We don't have this privilege to go to the deputies who will then go and ask the Imam directly, as we mentioned last time about Ghaibat al-Sughra. We have to do the next best thing. And the next best thing is taqleed. The next best thing is asking those ulama. The Quran says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of remembrance that which you do not know. Now you look in the tafasir, look in the ahadith, the people of remembrance, أهل الذكر, أهو, أهل البيت, and the ma'sumin, salamullahi alayhim. We can't ask them directly. But let's say I go to Maulana X or Ayatollah Y, whoever. I ask him a question. He gives me an answer which he found in a book written by someone. Go back, take the trail back. So he gets the answer from a book. Yes? Then you look in that book. Where did the person that wrote the book get the answer from? A hadith. Where did that hadith come from? The A'imma. So we can't ask Ahl al-Dhikr directly, but in a way we're asking Ahl al-Dhikr indirectly. Because all that the ulama give us is from the Ahl al-Bayt, or they try to get all of the narrations and bring, and they are those that in the time of ghaibah try to remove confusion, which is of course the main role of the Imam, as we mentioned about the corruption. But the ulama also try their hardest to remove any confusion that we have and to cause unity. So this is the role of the ulama. And Hazrat Luqman, in his will to his son, he mentioned 3 signs of the alim. Because also there's a big question, who is the alim? Anyone with a turban? Anyone called Maulana? No. The first is that they have knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second is that their actions are what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects. And the third is that they are aware of the haram and they abstain from them.
Okay, just keep an eye on the clock. In terms of some of the supplications you've mentioned with regards to getting close to the Imam, trying to understand the Imam, trying to build that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just if you can give us a few examples of some of the supplications that we can recite to actually fulfill that during the time of ghaibah.
Okay, and bearing in mind we have the other 2 questions very quickly. One of the most important supplications is Dua Nudba, as we mentioned. Dua Ahad, Ziyarat Al Yasin, of course Dua Tawassul. There are so many that mention the Imam. Why the Imam is not here, yearning for the Imam. Dua Iftitah. We complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for not having our hujjah with us. All of these adiyah, inshallah, in the future we'll have a long analysis on some of these adiyah supplications and understand how they bring us closer to the Imam and why it is important that we are close to the Imam through them.
Inshallah. Okay, so we'll look to answer now the questions of the sister. From my understanding, the first question was with regards to the prayer. We actually pray with our hands down by our side, where we find that our brothers in Saudi Arabia and other brothers across the world actually pray with their hands folded. So what's the reason for this?
Okay, first of all, to the sister, that alhamdulillah she is debating and she's in a friendly way and having intellectual debate, and it's good to ask questions and do more research.
It's a practical question. I mean, a lot of people actually face similar questions. So it's quite...
They wonder, why is it that I pray this way, someone else prays in another way? Now, Takfir and irsal al-yadayn are the two words. Takfir is the crossing, irsal is the keeping the hands straight. Two madhahib within Islam keep their hands straight, do irsal. The Shia and the Maliki. The rest do irsal. Takfir, sorry. They both have rationale behind their actions. Okay? The reason why the Shia Imamiyya sect pray with their hands by their sides is because of the ahadith which say from the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pray in the way in which you saw me pray. And there is a narration from Abdullah bin Abbas and other very reliable narrations which are thiqah, which are, you know, their sanad is strong. These narrations which show that the Holy Prophet of Islam prayed in this way, and the belief that the reason why some people would pray in this way is because they had their idols which they were covering or protecting. So they would pray with their idols. Why do we pray like this? Because we understand that the Holy Prophet of Islam prayed in this way. It's not a big issue to dwell about, which is why when you go to Makkah and Medina, you find that because the majority of they are from the other sects, that majority of them pray in takfir. Whereas because the Shia Imamiyya believe that there are hadith which show or which narrate the Holy Prophet of Islam praying in this way, we pray in this way. Simple answer. And it's good to, inshallah, know about why we do certain
in just references, so would you have any perhaps references or perhaps guidance which you can look to find out more information?
Guidance, there is always Tawdih al-Masail, maybe should have. Also, there's loads of books on prayers, Adab al-Salah. There are other books on philosophy of prayer by Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi.
Okay, so then...
180 questions. 180 questions. And also Logic for Islamic Rulings by Ayatollah Makarim and Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani. That should have the answers to these questions.
Sure. The second part of the question, very quickly, was in relation to Matam, the action in which we actually mourn the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. What's your reaction to that? Well, how would you answer that question?
She asked for Quranic reference, simple. فَسَقَّتْ وَجْهَهَا وَقَالَتْ أَجُوزٌ أَقِيمٌ. When the wife of Nabi Ibrahim was told that she was going to have a baby at this very old age of hers, فَسَقَّتْ وَجْهَهَا. She slapped her face viciously and said, an old barren woman like myself? Look, because she was happy, she slapped her face or she hit herself. Does it not make sense that in sadness, it's a natural, naturally, isn't it natural that when someone passes away or when there is, for example, a musibah, what do? We hit ourselves. It's not self-flagellation, it's remembering Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. The Quran mentions wife of a Nabi who hit herself out of happiness of gaining the child from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should make less sense than hitting ourselves in grieving for Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. So you find this rationale. It's natural, even when you go to some people who are not Muslim, someone has died in their family, you'll see them hitting themselves out of mourning, out of sadness, to show that they are sad, to signify that they're sad and to feel the pain of that person. And it's a natural human instinct.
Okay, I think we've got time perhaps for one of more of our last questions, very quickly. Any ahadith mentioning the state of affairs during the ghaibah? So what will be the state of the Muslims during the time of ghaibah?
Okay. Primarily you find a hadith, for example, that friends of the Muslimin will encourage friends will encourage other friends to help the oppressors. You find even today that there are oppressors in this world that are oppressing openly. Ahadith say that during the ghaibah of Imam Mahdi ajidallahu ta'ala farajah sharif, people will tell their friends to help those oppressors. How can we help oppressors? But this is the state of the affairs. And we find this today in the ghaibah. It doesn't say close to the Imam. It's not a sign. It's saying in the occultation of the Imam, this will happen. That's one amazing narration, and we find that today. The other is like the one we mentioned last week. Protecting religion will be more difficult than holding fire in the palm of our hand. In other words, it will be so hard and so difficult, which is why Rasulullah called us our brothers, those who protect their faith, because it will be so difficult in the absence of the Imam. Those that do so will have a great status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope we answered the questions of the sister well enough, and inshallah, perhaps if she has any more questions, we'd encourage people to call in, perhaps more related to the topic, but inshallah we'll look to answer the questions. If we can end with a short dua from yourself, Brother Shabbar, to just close off.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you very much, Brother Shabbar. Inshallah, that brings us to the end of our live show for this evening. Dear viewers, inshallah, we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.